Hi, welcome to our channel where we share the most intriguing stories. He bought the land for peace and quiet, but came back to find a mansion rising on it, built by strangers. What began as a property dispute spiraled into a full-blown battle against corruption, deception, and one woman's empire of lies. This isn't just theft, it's war. I bought the land because it was supposed to be quiet, boring, and invisible. That was the appeal. After closing a long, brutal commercial contract for a mixed-use project downtown, I wanted something simple, somewhere I could eventually build a small retreat, maybe a studio space away from clients who thought minor revisions meant rebuilding. Half a structure. The parcel sat just outside Austin, a little under 3 acres, wedged awkwardly behind a stalled upscale development called Cedar Lake Residences. The listing practically begged people not to touch it. Unbuildable, outdated infrastructure map, questionable access. Everyone else saw a problem. I saw a pricing error. I paid $42,000, signed clean paperwork, triple-checked the title, and walked away, owning land that technically scared off people with deeper pockets and less patience. I didn't rush anything. That was the luxury of it. No HOA, no bylaws, no president with a clipboard measuring fence heights. Just land, scrub grass, and the vague promise of something later. About 2 months after closing, I drove out with the idea of hiring a clearing crew. Nothing dramatic. I remember thinking I should bring coffee next time, maybe a folding chair. I never made it that far. I crested the access road and stopped dead because the view was wrong. There was fencing. Not the flimsy orange kind, but a full construction barrier with warning signs, locked gates, and a logo I didn't recognize. Heavy equipment sat where mesquite trees had been. The ground was scarred, flattened, rearranged without asking me. I parked and walked up to the gate, convinced there had been a mistake. There's a special feeling you get when reality refuses to match your paperwork. A man in a hard hat told me I couldn't enter the site. I told him I owned it. He told me with absolute confidence that the project belonged to Cedar Contracting LLC and that his instructions came from a woman named Karen Stewart. He said her name the way people say names they're used to obeying. I asked to see permits. He showed me a laminated copy through the fence. Owner listed Cedar Lake Homeowners Association. I laughed once out of reflex. It didn't land. By the time I reached the county offices, the humor had evaporated. The clerk was polite in the way people are when they assume you're about to be disappointed. She pulled the file, turned the screen, and there it was. Approved construction permit. Survey attached. My parcel number, my boundaries, my land, assigned to an entity that had never owned it. I pointed out the discrepancy. She frowned, zoomed in, then leaned back. Someone had used an old cadastral overlay, one that predated the current registry. Technically archived, practically useless. Somehow it had slipped through, or been pushed. I filed a police report that afternoon, which accomplished exactly what seasoned homeowners expected to accomplish in a civil property dispute. Documentation and nothing else. No one shut down the site, no one removed the fence. The foundation was already being poured, concrete trucks rolling in like they'd been invited by the universe itself. I drove back out before sunset, stood across the road, and watched strangers build something permanent on something that was mine. That was when I ordered a drone, cameras, and a mobile data plan. If someone was going to take my land, they were going to do it on record. The thing about watching your property being developed without your permission is that it doesn't get easier. It just gets weirder. I spent the next few weeks collecting footage like a man preparing for a war crime tribunal. The drone hovered above the job site daily, recording walls going up, plumbing snaking through trenches, HVAC units craned onto rooftops. They even installed security lights and a portable office. Meanwhile, I was still technically trying to prove I existed. Through my attorney, I discovered just how deep the paper trail deception went. The permit application filed with the city included an attachment, a copy of an old cadastral survey from nearly 20 years ago, scanned and labeled as updated. It showed my parcel, barely recognizable, merged into the HOA's outer buffer zone. The trick wasn't in erasing me, it was in pretending I had never been there to begin with. A few phone calls later, I learned that Cedar Lake HOA had filed for a Community Beautification and Expansion Initiative, citing their intent to recover undeveloped buffer zones and enhance neighborhood value. They had packaged it with shiny language, vague diagrams, and a seal of municipal endorsement that no one bothered to cross-check. Because why would they? It's a gated community run by people who wear polos embroidered with their own street names. I attended an HOA meeting. I wasn't invited, of course. They held it in a converted golf clubhouse with plastic chairs and passive-aggressive pastries. Karen Stewart was there, standing in front of a projector screen with an architectural rendering behind her that looked alarmingly like what I saw being built on my land. She was mid-speech when I walked in. I waited until she finished her sentence about revitalizing underutilized land parcels and then raised my hand. "Question," I said. "Who approved building a 2-story private residence on a parcel that doesn't belong to you?" The room stiffened like I'd just thrown a dead squirrel on the table. Karen blinked once, then smiled a smile that had clearly been tested in mirrors. "Mr. Hatcher," she said, mispronouncing my name just slightly, "there must be some confusion. That parcel was always part of our long-term development zone. The deed was corrected last year to reflect proper jurisdiction." "Interesting," I said, pulling out a copy of my original notarized deed, because I bought it 6 months ago from someone who held clear title for 10 years. I even brought a title insurance rep with me. That got a few sideways glances from the crowd. Karen didn't flinch. "Well, sometimes mistakes happen in county records. We're happy to discuss a settlement if it clears up the misunderstanding." I declined the croissant and walked out. That week, letters began appearing in my mailbox from Cedar Lake HOA, all bearing the same passive threat tone: requests to harmonize the aesthetics of your property, notifications of unauthorized fencing materials, and a warning that non-compliant land use could result in penalties. I reminded them each time that I was not a member of the HOA and that I had no obligation to comply with their rules. They reminded me, just as consistently, that my property was under provisional review. My lawyer called this the paperwork siege phase. It's when the aggressor tries to smother you in meaningless formalities while they build the thing they have no right to build. He advised me to file a formal civil lawsuit. I did, on 4 counts: unauthorized construction, document fraud, land seizure, and financial damages. I also filed for a preliminary injunction to stop construction. The judge, overburdened and cautious, denied it. The rationale: construction was too far along to warrant disruption without a full hearing. Translation: they'd built enough to earn inertia. By this point, the frame of the house was complete. The structure had a roof. I stood behind the fencing one evening, watching workers install custom glass panels in what was supposed to be a living room. My living room. I didn't feel rage or grief, just a kind of sterile clarity. I wasn't just dealing with theft. I was watching someone turn a lie into architecture. By the time autumn rolled around, there was a fully landscaped luxury home standing on my land, like it had always belonged there. It had everything: stucco finish, wraparound balcony, palm-lined walkway, and a goddamn infinity pool. The kind of house you see in real estate porn, listed with phrases like elevated lifestyle and bespoke architectural expression. Every time I visited the site, it looked less like a crime scene and more like a showroom. And I was still stuck watching from the wrong side of a 6-foot privacy fence. I ramped up my documentation efforts: daily drone flights, time-stamped footage, still photos, even weather logs to prove continuity. One of my cameras caught a catering van unloading trays for what looked like a private staging event. That's when it hit me. They weren't just building the house. They were getting ready to sell it. Meanwhile, Cedar Lake HOA's PR machine kicked into overdrive. A slick new microsite appeared under the name Cedar Lake Horizons. It featured glossy renderings, inspirational slogans like "Where Nature Meets Elegance," and a map of the neighborhood that quietly absorbed my parcel, as if it had always been part of their utopian vision. No mention of me. No acknowledgement that the land had been acquired through creative forgery. They even ran a promo video. A slow drone sweep set to soft piano music, gliding over the house they stole, cutting to shots of smiling children, cappuccinos, and women doing yoga on fake balconies. It was nauseating. What really twisted the knife was a local news segment that aired one Thursday night. Channel 5's lifestyle correspondent, a woman named Danielle with suspiciously perfect teeth, did a 3-minute piece on a bold new luxury development that redefines suburban sophistication. She stood in front of my stolen house, arms folded, describing its eco-conscious design and unprecedented lake views. The segment ended with a glowing interview from none other than Karen Stewart, framed by potted succulents. She smiled into the camera and said, "We're proud to reclaim forgotten land and transform it into something that uplifts the whole community." That line broke something in me, so I made my own site. Nothing fancy, just a clean white background with the title, "This Land is Not Yours." I uploaded all my drone footage, purchase documents, deed scans, notarized filings, a detailed timeline, and a big red banner at the top that read, "This property is stolen." I posted it to local forums, Reddit, Nextdoor, and every Facebook group within 10 zip codes. Then I sent the link directly to every member of the HOA board, the mayor's office, the city planning commission, and every news outlet that had ever covered a ribbon-cutting ceremony. That's how I met Cindy, former HOA treasurer. Burned out, sharp-tongued, and very ready to talk. She reached out via an anonymous email calling herself Neighbor X. At first I thought it was a prank, but then she sent me a photo of a receipt, one showing Cedar Contracting paying $10,000 to a landscaping company months before any permit was filed. "They were prepping that lot long before you knew," she wrote. Karen knew exactly what she was doing. Cindy gave me background. Karen had long operated like a queen bee, micromanaging neighbors' porch furniture while funneling HOA funds into sweetheart deals for community improvement. According to her, most of the board didn't even see full budgets. Karen just gave them sanitized versions with pastel graphs. The HOA had become a one-woman empire, and mine was just the latest conquest. Meanwhile, I started receiving HOA violation letters weekly. They escalated in tone, accusing me of non-conforming vegetation, improper visual harmony, and blight conditions. I replied to each with the same sentence, "I am not a member of your HOA. Cease and desist." They didn't. And then, as if to crown the absurdity, I received a subpoena. Karen was suing me for interference with community development efforts, alleging that my refusal to cooperate was harming property values. The documents included a photo of me standing outside the fence, labeled "Hostile Presence." I laughed for a full minute before emailing my lawyer. They finally listed it. I knew they would. I had been refreshing luxury real estate sites like a madman for weeks, waiting for that smug little thumbnail to appear. And there it was. Aerial shot of my property at golden hour, complete with sparkly text overlays. Exquisite modern Lakeview retreat. No HOA fees, $1,400,000. I stared at the screen for a long time, not out of shock anymore, but out of something colder. Precision. They weren't just building lies now, they were monetizing them. The listing was hosted through a boutique firm known for pushing high-dollar homes to out-of-state buyers. The kind who never ask too many questions because they're too busy thinking about where to install their wine fridge. The property description read like parody. Privately developed estate outside city constraints, offering panoramic views, designer interiors, and exclusive access to lakeside living. Rare opportunity to own unrestricted land. The last line made me snort. Rare opportunity, all right, especially since I already owned it. I didn't tell my lawyer right away. Instead, I created an alias, Lucas, a tech consultant relocating from Denver with cash in hand. I scheduled a private showing for Saturday. The agent, a woman named Savannah who sounded like she sold dreams for a living, responded with suspicious eagerness. "You're going to love this one," she said. "It's a hidden gem. Totally off-grid, but still luxurious. No HOA nonsense." She had no idea who she was talking to. I showed up wearing a button-up and mirrored sunglasses. The house was even worse in person. Not in quality. It was flawless, but in how completely it mocked everything I'd been fighting. The fresh-cut lawn, the motion sensor lanterns, the brushed steel house numbers mounted to a cedar slat wall. It didn't belong to me anymore. It belonged to whatever fantasy Karen had sold to herself and now tried to sell to someone else. Savannah walked me through the home like it was a sacred space. "This is the great room. Note the vaulted ceilings and the reclaimed oak beams. All local materials. Over here, we have the chef's kitchen. Bertazzoni appliances, waterfall quartz counters, custom lighting. And through here, the master suite. Sunrise views from bed." I played along, nodded, asked if the lake access was deeded. "Private road," she said, "not maintained by the city. You'll have total control." That was when I asked the big one. "So, no HOA at all?" Savannah smiled with polished confidence. "Nope, that's the beauty. You get the peace and style of a planned community without any of the restrictions. It's completely independent. Title is clean. We've already had offers, so if you're interested, we'd recommend moving quickly. I thanked her, took one last look at the pool I never built, and walked out. 10 minutes later, I filed a second police report, this time for attempted fraudulent sale of private property. I included footage from my hidden body cam, screenshots of the listing, and documentation of my ongoing legal case. My lawyer sent a cease and desist to the agency and the HOA, but I wasn't done. I uploaded a new video to my site. Proof of attempted theft, Cedar Lake HOA trying to sell stolen house. Within 24 hours, it had 30,000 views. By Monday, it hit local Reddit, then regional news. The agent went silent. The listing disappeared. But I knew Karen. She wasn't the type to go quietly. Sure enough, I got an email from her legal team titled Settlement Proposal. They offered me $150,000 to resolve the misunderstanding amicably and let them purchase the parcel at current market value. It was the first time they'd acknowledged that the land was mine. I declined. Publicly, I posted their offer letter online with the caption, "They built a mansion on my land without permission, and now they want to pay me pennies for it. Hard pass." That was the spark. Suddenly I had strangers reaching out, people who'd lived near Cedar Lake and suspected shady dealings for years, contractors who'd worked on jobs off the books, even a city employee who hinted that Karen had been tight with the zoning department for a long time. It wasn't just about my house anymore. It was about the pattern. About someone abusing bureaucracy and power with the confidence of a career liar. Then came the email I didn't expect. "My name is Grayson. I used to do books for Cedar Contracting. Karen fired me 6 months ago. I have files. Want them?" I stared at it for a full minute before replying. Yes, I very much did. Grayson turned out to be 23, nervous, and still way too polite for someone holding the keys to the kingdom. He suggested we meet at a nondescript diner just off of 35, the kind that hadn't changed its wallpaper since the Reagan administration, with cracked vinyl booths that stuck to your skin and coffee that tasted like regret and reheated trauma. He looked like he hadn't slept in days, hunched over a scuffed-up laptop and a manila folder, casting paranoid glances toward the kitchen like he expected Karen to burst through swinging a clipboard in one hand and a nail gun in the other. "This never leaves your hands," he said quietly, voice trembling just enough to notice. Then he slid a USB stick and the folder across the sticky table, his hand lingering for a second. "I didn't steal anything. I just backed things up because I knew she was going to screw me over." And she had, predictably, fired him under some vague claim of unauthorized file access just days after he flagged a double payment to a subcontractor that, upon closer inspection, didn't even exist. That was the first red flag. Then came ghost invoices, mysteriously vague project allocations, and buried inside a QuickBooks file was a gem labeled Budget B, Internal Eyes Only. Classic. I drove straight from the diner to my attorney's office. We sat side by side as we opened the folder, and I watched his eyebrows climb with each page. It was a smoking gun in thick, stapled form. Bank statements showing money transfers from Cedar Contracting LLC to an account registered under Karen's maiden name, signed receipts with her initials, internal emails in which she casually directed the misallocation of funds, overrode contractor estimates, and explicitly referred to my property line extension in emails supposedly about community upgrades. And then, the cherry on top, a high-resolution scan of an invoice from an upscale lighting supplier addressed directly to Karen Stewart, site owner. That was the moment it all shifted. This wasn't just about misfiled forms or shady math anymore. We had hard proof of financial control, deliberate deception, and ownership camouflaged behind a shell entity. My attorney didn't waste a second. We amended our civil case overnight, now adding wire fraud, identity falsification, and violation of state real estate code to the suit. An emergency motion was filed with the court, attaching the new evidence and requesting an immediate injunction to halt all current and planned activity on the property, construction, leasing, sale, anything. And this time, the judge paid attention. A hearing was scheduled within the week. Karen arrived in full armor, flanked by a new high-priced legal team who looked like they billed in 6-minute increments. She didn't so much as glance at me. Her posture was elegant and immovable, like she was trying to will herself into appearing above it all. Her expression was a study in cold, bureaucratic inconvenience. Her lead counsel stood and tried to toss the whole thing out on procedural grounds, claiming the documents were illegally obtained, lacked proper chain of custody, and were potentially doctored. My lawyer countered cleanly and confidently. We had a whistleblower ready to testify, and more importantly, the content of the documents outlined an unmistakable calculated pattern of fraudulent behavior. The judge nodded but said nothing. Then we called our first witness, Travis, a mid-level administrator from the city's permitting office. He looked deeply uncomfortable being in court, the kind of man who hated public speaking as much as he hated filing extension requests. But once he was sworn in, he told the story clearly. Under oath, Travis testified that Karen had visited his office multiple times, presenting a verified development overlay map, claiming expedited permitting authority due to her community planning oversight. She had even flashed what she called internal counsel approval from the HOA. When asked if he'd verified any of it independently, Travis shrugged and admitted, "You don't expect the HOA president to be full of shit." The courtroom erupted. Even the judge cracked a smile. With that, the judge ruled in our favor. The emergency injunction was granted, freezing all construction and administrative activity on the site. But it didn't stop there. The court also ordered a formal asset review of Cedar Contracting and flagged several related properties for further investigation. The mood in the courtroom shifted from tense to electric. Something big had just cracked open, and it didn't stop unraveling. Grayson's digital archive triggered a chain reaction. Within a week, one contractor Karen had stiffed came forward, then another. It was like breaking a dam. Turns out she had been delaying payments, overinflating invoice totals, and promising partial equity in future projects in lieu of actual compensation. Most had stayed quiet, afraid of blacklisting, afraid of legal threats. But now, they saw blood in the water. A group of them teamed up and filed a class action lawsuit for breach of contract and labor code violations. Their attorney contacted mine. Suddenly, we weren't a lone voice. We were a coalition. Meanwhile, Cindy started digging. She began forwarding me emails from HOA members, angry, exhausted residents who were sick of being silenced. Some said their HOA newsletters had been edited after printing, with dissenting remarks about budget transparency conveniently scrubbed from digital versions. Then the city got involved. Our case made local news. That same week, the mayor's office quietly launched an inquiry into Cedar Lake HOA. The tax assessor reopened zoning designations on at least 3 parcels tied to Karen's name. The state real estate board took notice. And then Marcus Winslow showed up. He was a sharp-eyed investigative reporter from the Austin Tribune with a sardonic voice and a way of making people confess things they hadn't meant to say. He called me late one evening and said simply, "I think there's a bigger story here, and I think you just cracked it open." He interviewed me, Grayson, Cindy, and 2 of the contractors. Then he got to work. Public records, HOA filings, vendor agreements, and transactional footprints. What he found painted a damning picture. Karen had been weaponizing her HOA authority to create a private development funnel. She'd use community projects to justify new infrastructure, then flip the adjacent land under one of several shell LLCs she controlled. You don't just have a lawsuit, Marcus told me. You've got a corruption expose with beachfront views. And through all of it, Karen said nothing. No public statement, no rebuttal, just cold silence and closed doors. Whether it was strategy or unraveling, no one could say. But one thing was certain. The construction stopped. My property, once a chaotic tangle of half-finished renovations and unauthorized excavation, stood frozen. Shutters halfway installed, tools abandoned, patio furniture still shrink-wrapped. A mansion mid-transformation, like someone had paused the lie before they could finish building it. One night, Cindy sent me a message that just said, "This might actually be happening." She might finally go down. I stared at the screen for a long time before replying. I was too busy watching an old clip, footage from the very first day, showing the empty land, the crooked fence, and the first crew of workers who thought they were just doing their jobs. Back then, I thought I was fighting to stop a house. Now, I understood I was fighting to expose an empire built on stolen trust. The courtroom was fuller than usual, not packed to the walls but weighted, buzzing with the kind of quiet tension that settles in when something is about to break open. I scanned the room and spotted unfamiliar faces. Other property owners, city staffers, maybe even a few reporters pretending to be clerks or legal interns, their eyes sharp behind notepads and tablet screens. The kind of people who show up when they sense a story, a scandal, or both. And there, in the middle of it all, sat Karen, immovable, composed, not rigid. No, she was too practiced for that. She radiated a cold, theatrical stillness, like a woman who had rehearsed this moment in front of a mirror and dared the world to blink first. She had switched legal teams again. Her newest attorney, a well-groomed man with a polished accent and a voice like polished oak, opened the defense with a sweeping monologue about community misunderstandings, administrative miscommunication, and expansion intentions that, while noble, may have exceeded their mandate. It was carefully crafted, soothing, almost believable, but it was also undermined by a mountain of damning evidence. A projected email thread displayed across the courtroom screen showed Karen writing phrases like, "Push it through before he catches on," and "bury the paperwork under the annexation clause before it gets flagged." Not vague, not speculative, strategic, calculated. My attorney took a different approach. He didn't make speeches. He dissected, piece by piece, document by document. He walked the court through the anatomy of deception. He began with the fraudulent deed transfer and the doctored overlay map that had conveniently redrawn community boundaries to include my property. He pointed to the QuickBooks audit tying Karen directly to Cedar Contracting, LLC. He detailed the permit approvals, flagged as expedited but missing official city stamps. Then came the witnesses. First was Grayson, shaky hands but clear voice, presenting spreadsheets that outlined shell corporations and suspicious wire transfers. Then Travis from the city permitting office, clearly uncomfortable but direct under oath. He admitted Karen had pressured him by invoking her HOA planning authority, a term he said he'd never even heard used officially before her. Two contractors followed, each testified about incomplete payments, promises of future equity, and the moment they realized they were being played. Then came Cindy. She had stayed quiet for so long, but that day she stepped forward and swore in. She testified that Karen had altered HOA records, reworded meeting minutes, reissued newsletters with key portions edited or removed, and pushed through internal votes that had never taken place. Her voice cracked only once when describing the guilt of watching neighbors blindly trust a leader who was robbing them behind polished smiles. With each account, each slide of evidence, the marble facade Karen had built around herself began to fracture. The courtroom didn't erupt. There were no gasps or dramatics. Just silence, like everyone was watching something sacred decay in real time. Then, in the front row, sat Marcus Winslow, the Austin Tribune's investigative reporter. He wasn't testifying. He didn't need to. He just observed, notebook open, pen gliding across the page like he was chronicling the fall of an empire he'd already seen crumble. Our eyes met once. He nodded. No smile. Just a quiet recognition that the arc of the story was now irreversible. When the judge returned from recess, he didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. His verdict struck like a drumbeat. The structure built on my land was constructed without legal consent, under fraudulent permits, using deliberately altered and misleading documentation. Cedar Contracting LLC was declared an undisclosed personal vehicle of Karen Stewart in violation of multiple state business disclosure laws. Karen Stewart was found personally liable for willful misrepresentation, fraudulent land development, and attempted illegal conveyance of private property. It didn't stop there. He ordered that full legal title, structure, and land be restored to me, along with immediate cancellation of any liens, claims, or third-party interests associated with the fraudulent activity. But the real thunder came next. Karen's personal and corporate assets were to be frozen pending the outcome of civil damages. That included her residence, multiple investment accounts, and, fittingly, the house she had tried to build on my land. And then the judge delivered the final strike. The legal authority of the Cedar Lake HOA was suspended, effective immediately, pending a complete forensic audit by a court-appointed compliance monitor. It was over. Karen didn't look at me once as the decision was read. Her eyes stayed forward, her mouth a tight line of denial or restraint. It was hard to say. I half expected a breakdown, a scream, a final flailing lunge toward someone, anyone. But she merely rose, collected her things, and exited like royalty exiled from her own court. Outside, however, her act didn't hold. Marcus Winslow was waiting, with a mic, a camera crew, and a single question. Karen, Marcus Winslow, Austin Tribune. Would you like to comment on your role in the Cedar Contracting LLC investigation? She froze, just for a second. Long enough for the camera flash to catch her expression somewhere between shock and fury. Then she pivoted and walked away, heels striking the pavement in a rhythm that sounded less like escape and more like retreat. That weekend, the article dropped. Front page, center column, the headline, the HOA Queen Pin, how one woman tried to privatize a suburb and got caught. Marcus didn't pull punches. He laid it all out: names, dates, emails, deeds, financial records, even drone photos of the unauthorized construction. He painted a chilling portrait, a woman who had used the invisible armor of HOA power to build an empire of control, concealment, and corruption, hiding behind bylaws and bureaucracy while seizing what she never owned. The public reaction? Nuclear. HOAs countywide scrambled to review procedures. Cities reopened audit requests. The mayor's office launched a local initiative for HOA transparency reform. Forums exploded with stories from people who'd lived similar nightmares, stories that, until now, had gone unheard. Suddenly, I wasn't just the guy who fought back. I was the one who won. Karen, on the other hand, became something else. Queen HOA became a meme. Twitter roasted her with clips of her exit looped to Another One Bites the Dust. A neighborhood wine bar released a drink called the Karen, bitter, overpriced, and impossible to finish. She became the symbol of everything wrong with unchecked HOA authority and the warning that it could all come crashing down. She filed for personal bankruptcy within the month. Her developer's license was suspended. Contractors she'd burned dragged her through courtrooms in a flurry of lawsuits. She lost everything. Grayson, now semi-famous as the whistleblower, launched a podcast called Whistleblown. Cindy was elected to the restructured HOA board in a landslide, leading a total overhaul of governance rules. And me. I finally stepped foot inside the house. It felt strange at first, walking through hallways I hadn't designed, bedrooms I hadn't planned, tile I didn't choose. Everything gleamed with boutique precision, stone counters, frameless glass doors, radiant floor heat. It was elegant, overbuilt. It was hers. And now it was mine. I didn't tear it down. I didn't flip it. Instead, I converted it into a private retreat for clients of my architecture firm. A creative retreat. A place to collaborate, reflect, and, in more than one case, learn from my story. Some laughed, some nodded. A few whispered that they'd lived through something similar, but never had the proof to fight. And every guest, without exception, walks past the same sign at the gate. Private property built by a thief now belongs to the owner. It started as a joke. A half-drunken, half-serious suggestion tossed out during a late-night phone call with Cindy after the final paperwork came through. We were both exhausted, riding the strange, dizzying high that comes after a long fight finally ends. The courtroom battles were over, the rulings filed, the liens cleared. The land was mine. The house was mine. The silence from Karen's side had turned from smug to stunned. "You should throw a party," Cindy said, her voice slurred slightly from whatever wine she was nursing. "Like a real one. Celebrate your HOA-free life. Make it loud enough for the entire suburb to hear. Rub it in a little. Okay, a lot." I laughed. "A party?" "A bash," she clarified. "With music, tequila, inflatable flamingos. I want Marcus dancing in a pool float. You earned this." I told her I'd think about it. 2 days later, I had 200 invites printed. HOA-free summer bash. No clipboards allowed. Swimsuits mandatory. I didn't even care if everyone came. It wasn't about the guest list. It was about planting a flag. About reclaiming something that had been manipulated, twisted, nearly taken from me under the guise of community standards. This wasn't just about land. It was about defiance. We picked the hottest Saturday of the year. The kind of day where the air feels like a heated blanket and everyone moves a little slower, searching for shade or chlorinated salvation. I went all in. I hired a local taco truck with a handwritten chalkboard menu that promised tacos better than HOA rules. I booked a cover band, the Easements, who leaned into the theme hard, showing up in matching t-shirts that read, "We don't recognize your authority." I even hired a licensed lifeguard, because nothing says legitimacy like a whistle-wearing teenager with sunscreen stripes on her nose and a zero-tolerance policy for cannonballs gone wrong. By noon, the property was buzzing. Full, old friends, new clients, ex-HOA defectors, rogue neighbors who'd finally stopped caring about bylaws. A couple of city employees just happened to be in the area, but I noticed them nursing beers and chatting with the taco guy, not taking notes. Even Marcus showed up looking impossibly casual in black sunglasses and board shorts, a six-pack of some ironic craft brew under one arm, and that same quiet reporter's smirk on his face. And then there was the house. That house, once a battlefield, once a monument to arrogance, had never felt more like mine. Not because of the tile I hadn't picked or the imported fixtures I never would have chosen, not even because of the title deed that now bore only my name. It felt like mine because it echoed, with music, with barefoot footsteps, with laughter that didn't ask for permission. Someone cannonballed into the pool, sending up a wave that splashed a whole row of plastic lawn chairs. Someone else took a watermelon and, with a serrated knife and questionable artistic talent, carved the words "No rules, just rights" into its side. People started taking pictures with it, like it was a monument. Someone, I still don't know who, tried to install a fake HOA complaint box next to the grill. They even labeled it Form 14C, Report Your Neighbor's Fun. We burned it, ceremonially, in the fire pit. Everyone cheered. People kept asking about the plaque out front, the now infamous metal sign I'd had custom made and mounted beside the front gate. I lost track of how many times I told the story. The full arc, from fence disputes to forged permits to fraud charges and Karen's silent, bitter exit. Their reactions were always the same: first amusement, then disbelief, and finally admiration. They lined up to take selfies with it. I had to replace the original plaque 2 weeks later. It had been smudged by fingerprints, sun-faded, and covered in lipstick kisses from guests with a flair for symbolic revenge. As the sun began to dip, the light turned gold, brushing across the still sparkling pool like liquid foil. Someone had strung a line of twinkle lights from the pool cabana to a young pecan tree that hadn't even been part of the original landscape plan. It didn't matter. Nothing had to be approved. We had made our own rules. Or better yet, thrown them out entirely. I found myself standing near the water, a cold beer in hand, with Cindy and Marcus on either side of me. The three of us watched the crowd spread out across the patio and lawn, dancing, laughing, lounging, living like people who had never worried about what color their front doors were supposed to be or how many inches their grass was over regulation. Cindy nudged me, handed me another bottle, and said, "You really showed her." I shook my head slowly, eyes still on the fading orange horizon. "Nah," I said. "She showed herself. I just wrote it down." Marcus raised his bottle, that unreadable smirk sharpening into something more sincere. "To thieves who build mansions, and the people who burn down their illusions." We clinked bottles. We laughed. And for the first time in years, maybe the first time ever, there wasn't a single form to fill out. No meeting to attend, no neighbor lurking behind the blinds, squinting at us with suspicion. No passive-aggressive notes taped to doors about unauthorized gatherings or parking violations. Just music, friends, the soft crackle of fire pit embers and the low hum of bass echoing through open windows. A world without Karen. A life without clipboards. It was quiet. Not the sterile, enforced kind of quiet Karen always pretended was peaceful, but real quiet. Earned quiet, beautifully, rebelliously quiet.